Okay, we'll start with this. It appears that unbeaten featherweight from right here in the US of A, Tiaria Brown, has already booked herself a fight for next year in late January, set to go down in Bogota, Colombia, January 26th, against an opponent that has yet to be announced. It's not a secret that Tiaria Brown would like to share the ring with Australia's own Sky Nicholson, who's WBC interim champion and in a pole position to become full champion when the time comes. Some might ask, how is it that Sky Nicholson has less fights and less time in the sport of boxing than Tiaria Brown, but she's interim champion and Tiara isn't? Well, you have to fight in those eliminators, those WBC eliminators. You can have as many fights with as many fighters as you want, but if they're not WBC eliminators, then they're not going to move you up the ranks, and the same applies to any of those other alphabet organizations. I think the biggest difference between Sky and Tiara's situation is that Sky came into the sport of boxing with a major promoter behind her, but Tiaria Brown didn't, and she still doesn't have one. That's the difference that having a major promoter can have on your career. And that's not even saying that I'm against the fight between Tiaria Brown and Sky Nicholson. A part of me feels that that fight might materialize somewhere down the line, perhaps 2 to 3, maybe even 4 fights from now. It's a fight that might happen, though ultimately, right now, Sky Nicholson's not giving her the time of day. A fight between her and Sarah Mahfoud, former IBF champion at this weight. A fight between Sky and Sarah was ordered, and that looks to be what Sky Nicholson's going to do. Take some wrangling, as Sarah Mahfoud, before that order came down, she had already booked herself a fight in her native Denmark against Michelle Braga. So I imagine that if Sky takes care of business with Michelle Braga, immediately after that, she'll fight Sky Nicholson for the newly vacated WBC title. That's her focus. Is it unfair that Sky Nicholson has less time in the sport of boxing and less fights than Tiaria Brown, but she's already in a pole position to fight for an alphabet title? Is that unfair? And that's not the way to look at it. You're either fighting in the eliminators to fight for an alphabet title, or you're not. And if Tiaria Brown didn't, that's not Sky Nicholson's problem. She's not saying that Tiaria Brown isn't a good fighter. She's a very good fighter, experienced, but Sky Nicholson doesn't owe her anything, and she doesn't owe her a fight. And if at this point in her career, she's not interested in facing her, short of a mandate or something like that, those are the breaks. The saving grace is that Tiaria Brown, despite of not being with a major promotional outfit, she still managed to fight 2 times this year. She hasn't been inactive, sitting on the shelf collecting dust and ring rust. She has been keeping busy, and she means to keep busy early next month. Early next year, late next month. As far as Sky, because Sarah Mahfoud already has a fight on schedule in the first quarter of next year, I imagine that the fight between her and Sarah might happen towards the tail end of the first quarter or somewhere in the second quarter of next year. It's a fight that needs to happen, and it's a good fight, the fight between her and Sarah Mahfoud, because Sarah, in many ways, is more experienced than Sky. She used to be a champion herself. She's been in there with Amanda Serrano. She's been in there with Nina Menke and Karen Carbajal. In many ways, Sarah is a good litmus test, a good acid test for Sky Nicholson, and Sky's on schedule for one. Can only hope that at some point Nicholson versus Brown goes down, because there seems to be backstory that is building. It's an ongoing rivalry in the women's featherweight division, and I would like to see them share the ring with each other at some point. In men's super bantamweight news, on the heels of his latest undisputed run, Inoue describes Marlon Tapales as one of the most intense fights that he's ever had, signaling that he's not quite ready to move up to featherweight. You know, when he took on Stephen Fulton and he looked the way that he looked, people already started talking about him moving up. But I told you, it's too soon for any of that. He just got there. The effort put forth by Marlon Tapales exceeded the name value he brought to his undisputed junior featherweight championship. Yokohama's Inoue eventually found a way to punch a hole through a wall as he scored 2 knockdowns in the fight. The latter forced the visiting Filipino down for the full 10 count in the 10th round of their lineal WBC, WBA, IBF, and WBO full unification clash last Tuesday in the Akiaki Arena in Tokyo, Japan. I am happy that I got the knockout in such a decisive manner, Inoue said on his latest historic achievement. It was one of the most intense fights I've ever had, probably, but my corner cheered me up and kept me focused throughout the bout. Inoue's power is still there. His first official knockdown of the match was in the first half, and the second was in the second half. Due to an adjustment from Marlon Tapales, switching over from a high guard to a shell guard to keep that left hand at home to protect that side of his face from oncoming right hands. It bought him time. Granted that he didn't fly to Tokyo just to settle for a participation trophy, still, Tapales was rightfully lauded for delivering a stiffer challenge than was the case when Inoue violently dethroned Nonito Donaire, Paul Butler, and Stephen Fulton all in succession and barely losing a round in his previous 3 outings. He never showed me fatigue or damage from his face, noted Inoue, who outlanded Tapales 146-52, according to CompuBox. I was quite surprised when he went down in the 10th round. A momentary lapse in judgment. Marlon Tapales had switched his guard. Once again, he went from using a shell guard to a high guard, which enabled Inoue to plant a right hand, a well-placed right hand, right down the pipe, right down the middle. And Marlon Tapales could not recover. Now what the future might hold for the newly crowned 2-time undisputed champion, Team Inoue is eyeing the Tokyo Dome and Saudi Arabia as hosting locations for a 3-fight year next year. Naoya Inoue will not be able to create as much history next year as has been the case in the past few years. The big event plans in store for the year ahead, however, could make him a lot richer. Hideyuki Ohashi, Inoue's career-long promoter and head of Ohashi Promotions, revealed plans to bring the 4-division champion to the famed Tokyo Dome for at least his next fight in Japan. A trip to the Middle East could also be in the cards for Inoue's forthcoming campaign. It's being reported they're already in talks with Team Nery, Luis Nery, the former champion, and Inoue's WBC mandatory challenger. Once banned by the Japanese Boxing Commission from boxing on Japanese soil due to testing positive for a banned substance after the first Yamanaka fight and blowing the weight on the scales ahead of the second, they may lift that ban to bring him to Japan so that Inoue can beat the crap out of that guy in front of a lot of people, a lot of boxing fans. Revenge. In a manner of speaking. For Inoue's next fight, I'm thinking about bigger venues, and I'm also thinking about Saudi Arabia, noted Mr. Ohashi to media members on Wednesday. The Tokyo Dome is an option. The concern over fighting in front of a limited audience was raised after Inoue's 10th round knockout of Marlon Tapales on Tuesday to fully unify the junior featherweight division. The historic event took place in front of a jam-packed crowd of 15,000 at the Ariake Arena in Tokyo. The same venue has hosted each of Inoue's last 3 fights, each time left with more fans on the waiting list than they were able to grant entrance. The Tokyo Dome boasts 55,000 seat capacity, but the venue has only hosted 2 major boxing events. You figure that if they can lift that ban, if they will allow Luis Nery to re-enter Japan for a boxing match, if they allow him to box, that's going to draw out a lot of people. Vengeance for Shinsuke Yamanaka. In tandem with Luis Nery's desire to do the fight. It's not a secret. He's been calling out Inoue, calling him out on the predication that he already took out one prominent Japanese fighter. He feels he can take out another. The Tokyo Dome boasts a 55,000 seat capacity. The venue has only hosted 2 major boxing events, both headlined by then unbeaten, undisputed heavyweight champion Mike Tyson, including his monstrous February 1990 knockout defeat to Buster Douglas in what remains the benchmark for historic boxing upsets. As previously reported by BoxingScene.com, Inoue and his team are currently in talks for a fight versus WBC mandatory challenger and former 2-division champion Luis Nery. The bout is targeted for next May. With a win, Mr. Ohashi noted the possibility of a title defense versus the WBA's #1 contender, former unified champion MJ Akhmadaliev of Uzbekistan, a matchroom fighter. Is that why they want to do that one in Saudi? For a long time now, many of Matchroom's fighters have fought in that region of the world. It's not just the Day of Reckoning card that we just watched. In any event, with a win, Mr. Ohashi noted the possibility of a title defense versus WBA #1 contender Murajan Akhmadaliev, who Tapales dethroned to win the WBA and IBF titles in April for Inoue's Middle East debut. Such a bout would take place in September. Inoue himself floated the idea of a voluntary title defense versus former 3-division champion Jean-Riel Casimero as a third fight for next year. Mr. Ohashi was not quite giddy over the matchup, but you get the sense that because Inoue's the one that pitched that idea, he just wants to beat that guy up. He just wants to put that guy in the hospital. I don't blame him.
There's a bit of backstory between them. The fight that never was, they were supposed to fight the year the pandemic hit, back there in 2020. But because the crowds all went away, the fight got put off. It got postponed. The Japanese investors, they withdrew.
Sean Gibbons, Jean-Riel Casimero's then manager, funneled him over to the PBC side of things, and he was over there for a while till he eventually lost his WBO title due to a violation in the United Kingdom ahead of what was supposed to be the Paul Butler fight. I think he used a sauna or something like that. In any event, Inoue himself floated the idea of a voluntary title defense versus former 3-division champion Jean-Riel Casimero as the third fight of next year. Mr. Ohashi was not quite as giddy over the matchup, though Inoue views the matchup as unfinished business. They were supposed to meet in April of 2020 in a bantamweight unification match in Las Vegas. They have both since moved up from bantam up to super bantam, and if Inoue wants a third fight next year, that's as good a guy as any at these weights. I like the schedule, and I like the idea of Inoue fighting 3 times, not just 2, in the coming year. Upstairs, north of Super Bantam, at Super Lightweight, the wheels appear to be in motion for Lopez versus Ortiz, which is rumored to be signed for February 8th in the second month of next year. WBO and Ring Magazine Super Lightweight champion Teofimo Lopez and Jermaine Ortiz have signed contracts for a clash on Thursday, February 8th at the Michelob Ultra Arena in Las Vegas. Solid first defense for the takeover. Not the first defense I thought he was going to make. I thought he was going to fight former unified champion Jose Ramirez, who is an easier fighter to understand, has a more simple approach than the more layered and younger and fresher Jermaine Ortiz.
Perhaps if Teofimo hadn't taken off the remainder of this year, it would have been Jose he ended up fighting next.
You have to remember, they set aside Heisman night for what was supposed to be Teofimo's next fight before this year is out. Teofimo, who sports a professional record of 19 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 13 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 20 professional bouts, in many ways best described as his own worst enemy, because if this Jermaine Ortiz fight, if this goes sideways, it might be interpreted as Teofimo's undoing, his own fault. You're the one who wanted to take the rest of the year off, and if you would have fought, it might have been against somebody else. It might have been against Jose Ramirez. What makes the Jose Ramirez fight a more winnable fight than this one? Well, Jose, in spite of being very experienced at this weight, very tall, statuesque fighter, he's a simple fighter to understand. He comes forward in a straight line, wants to throw punches and bunches, mid-range to inside, the kind of aggressive customer that plays right into Teofimo's hands, his counter-punching, his speed, and his movement.
Jermaine isn't as decorated or experienced as Jose, but he is more layered than Jose.
Sporting a professional record of 17 wins with 1 loss, 1 draw, 8 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 19 professional bouts. He's a young guy, 27 years old, good dimensions for the weight. He's a newbie to 140, just like Teofimo. He hasn't been there that long. He was just in action not that long ago in September opposite the ring Antonio Moran. Now he's going to be opposite the ring Teofimo Lopez, and fighters have a habit of rising to the occasion based on the size of the occasion. Many would say that that's what Jermaine Ortiz did opposite the ring Vasyl Lomachenko. He gave him all he could handle, and in the eyes of a few, he did enough to win the fight. He deserved a decision.
He used to be Vasyl Lomachenko's sparring partner for a time, and rumor has it he's now being trained by Bill Haney, Devin Haney's father. Devin Haney, Teofimo's professional rival.
The danger here is that Jermaine Ortiz, because he's a more layered fighter than Jose Ramirez, if he decides to keep this a boxing match, he could create a very frustrating situation for Teofimo Lopez, the boxer puncher, the counter puncher, the kind of fighter that relies on the other man's aggression to get his power punches off. If Jermaine decides to use his height and his length and his speed to box him from the outside, well, Teofimo might not look good and he might lose.
Potential banana skin energy in association with this fight, more so than what could have been a Jose Ramirez fight. Both Teofimo and Jermaine only saw action once this year.
Teofimo back in June against then-champion Josh Taylor, and Jermaine Ortiz more recently in September against Antonio Moran. It doesn't help Teofimo Lopez's marketability that he wasn't more active this year, that was a scintillating performance against Josh Taylor. He looked fantastic, better than he's looked in years, and he didn't build off of that momentum this year. He let his name and his profile sort of cool off, and Teofimo is one of these young guys that he wants to make a truckload of cash every time he gets out there. But how's he supposed to do that when he's stifling his own momentum? I mean, Devin Haney fought 2 times this year, as did Canelo.
Anthony Joshua fought 3 times this year.
The last 2 are bigger names that make a lot more money than Teofimo Lopez does, and they see the importance in staying busy and staying active, that it doesn't benefit you in the least bit sitting on the shelf, fighting only once a year. It doesn't help anyone, it doesn't help anything.
And it's not like Top Rank wasn't going to get him another fight. They had another fight date lined up for Teofimo. He wanted to sit out the rest of the year.
Strange that there isn't more talk centered around a Teofimo Lopez versus Devin Haney fight, Devin Haney unification match. Devin became a champion at this same weight in his last outing opposite the Ring Regis Prograis, but all we're hearing about is a Haney versus Ryan Garcia fight. Perhaps the reason we don't hear more about a Haney versus Lopez fight is because both teams' financial demands would be astronomical.
It's an expensive fight to put on.
This upcoming Jermaine Ortiz fight, comparatively, is a lot less expensive, but it's risky because, as stated, if Jermaine Ortiz goes in there, uses his height, his length, his speed, and his freshness to keep this a boxing match and not a shootout, well, that style doesn't favor Teofimo Lopez at all. Jermaine Ortiz, he's a multi-layered fighter and a switch hitter. He can fight orthodox, he can fight southpaw.
He takes a cue out of Devin Haney's playbook now that he's got Bill in his corner. Fights like a pure boxer. That could create a very frustrating situation for Teofimo.
Solid first defense and a very intriguing fight, but it is a dangerous fight. It has its perils for Teofimo Lopez.